since 2008 than they've ever been. Let's see. So I'm a co-creator of today's presentation and information, along with Sarah Lansbury, who is actually here and will be doing future presentations, and Jennifer Teeler, who's with the local Susan G. Komen Foundation, who I think may or may not be joining us as well. So we have a lot to cover, so we'll go ahead and just dive right in. Here's our agenda. Quick introductions. We're going to talk about just an overview of the volunteer engagement cycle. Not spend too much time there. We're going to start diving right into the best practices and the things that we think you should know are important about managing a volunteer project. So we're talking about time-specific types of projects. Whether they're done in a day, what I call, or some other kind of short-term, we're talking about specific, like day-long projects. And then lastly, hopefully, we'll have a bit of time for questions. If you have questions in the process, please feel free to ask them. Okay, let's start. I'm going to find out a little bit more about you. Please, if you raise your hand if you currently volunteer in any capacity. Raise your hand. Okay. And how many, raise your hand if you volunteered in the past. Raise your hand. And how many of you have ever supervised or managed other volunteers? Okay, so did everybody raise their hand? Is there anybody who didn't raise their hand? Okay. Okay, so sometimes when we ask the question, do you volunteer, sometimes people think of it in very formal terms. Like, I am a volunteer with an organization, I signed up, or I've completed some type of process. We want to be sure that people realize that there are many, many examples of volunteering. So coaching an athletic team, serving on the school PTA, transporting a family member or neighborhood to do errands, that's all volunteering. So essentially everybody has at some point volunteered. And so we want to call upon that today in that you all have experience in this realm. Whether you realize that or not, realize it now that you do. You all have experience. And we're going to ask for you to call upon those experiences as you approach the development, the planning, and the execution of a volunteer project. Okay? All right, real quickly, this is the volunteer engagement cycle. Start with planning, develop volunteer roles, recruit those volunteers, screen and place, or find the best match for them, orient and train, supervise and support, recognition. In some ways, recognition spreads across the entire cycle. You don't wait till here to recognize volunteers. But recognition as a formal aspect usually comes towards the end of a project or a cycle. You always want to evaluate how you're doing, take that evaluation and put it back into your planning as feedback, and continue. Okay? And as anybody in volunteer engagement knows, it's not as simple as following this wheel. Sometimes you step back, sometimes something will come ahead. But that's basically what we're talking about. So we're going to apply this more specifically and using your experience as a volunteer, or in some cases a volunteer manager, to develop a strategy for managing a volunteer project. So what I'd like to do is just take 1 minute, and you yourself, I want you to answer this question. You can either write down an answer or just have it in your head. First, I want you to answer, what has been your most rewarding or positive volunteer experience, and why? And what has been your most negative volunteer experience, and why? Okay, so give that just a minute thought. You can close your eyes, transport back to that park where you were picking up trash. And that could have been your best experience ever. Why was that? Probably wasn't the trash, right? Or something else about it. Okay, everybody have, at least in mind, those experiences? Okay, I'd like to take 2 or 3 examples of somebody that would like to say what your most rewarding or positive experience and why it was. Who would like to share what their most rewarding experience was and why? Yes, Jose?
So I was in Montana, and I was from one town, and maybe about 3 hours away was another town, and it's very sparsely populated. And I stopped for dinner, showing the new, so I was a Vista, showing the new Vista, and this big native guy comes up to me. He's like, "Your name's Jose, ain't it?" No, like that's not.
This was at the event?
Yeah, no, this is at just getting food, and I was like, I know I'm not from there, so how do you know me? And he said, you helped me get my first house. So you were a presenter at that home buyer education and I'm in your match savings program. And right away I knew who he was, and without the new Vista there, no one would have believed my story. So it was all the stars lined up, and I was just like, wow, how'd that happen that way? But it felt really good to have helped someone, to get their first house. And I asked him, like, and he told me that he still saves to this day. So it really changed his life.
And that's great to get that feedback, Luke, because sometimes you don't, right?
Yeah.
You have to trust that what you did had an impact, but in your case, you heard what that impact was. Yeah, so that's great. Did somebody else over here? Sarah?
I work at the Red Cross, but I volunteer on the disaster action team, and so we go out when there's a house fire and help people by providing them with a place to stay and food and clothing, and it's just rewarding in general. But it's great when you're sitting there and you're helping somebody, and they're it's covered in ash and smell like smoke, and because they were in the house, and you're finding them a place to stay, and they just come up and they hug you and they're teary-eyed, because you're helping them, and it's continually rewarding every time I get to go out on a call. I mean, not that I hope for house fires, but it's it's great that I get to do that. It's an awesome experience.
That's great. Yeah, it taps into something important, right?
Yes, it's very emotional.
Okay, great. One more, if anybody would like to share. Positive? Yeah.
I volunteered in Haiti after the earthquake,
Okay.
and it sort of launched a whole passion for disaster relief stuff and also development in Haiti. But I think what made it super rewarding was quite a few things. One is that I was able to learn a ton as I was doing it. Another is that there was very tangible change. It was very clear that after you cleared a house and did it with the family whose house it was and stuff like that, and then helped them get a shelter that they could expand on and stuff like that, that something had happened that was way more than even just the house, like bridging cultures and stuff like that. And I also made some of the closest friends that I have now. It led me to go back 2 more times, and the third time was because I saw so many nonprofits doing more damage than good. It led me to do a lot of research the last time I went. So it really just catered a lot of, not catered, it really fostered a lot of interest in that sector of international development, and bridged a lot of different gaps and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, that's great. So it sounds like it was definitely a valuable learning opportunity, and the impacts were clear.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Who would like to share a not so positive volunteer experience and why it wasn't? Yes, Greg.
I was working with a construction group, and they got to be a point where they didn't feel like they could use more help. So it was along the lines of, there I was, there to help, and then, yeah, just go take a nap. And I was just like, wait a minute. There's absolutely nothing that you all need. It just boggled my mind that I felt like I was being dismissed as a volunteer, and there are a few of us who were being dismissed as volunteers, so it just did not sit well.
Yeah, that's a very common, if people share a negative experience, that's one of the most common things, is I got there and I felt like they didn't need me. Or I felt like they didn't plan for the best use of my time. It was a waste of my time. Yeah. Yeah, that's unfortunate. On behalf of volunteer managers, I apologize. Yes, great.
Yeah, it was similar to his. I volunteered for about 20 years for Special Olympics down in Texas,
Oh, yeah.
and really enjoyed it. And when my wife and I moved up here, we volunteered for a couple of years for some things, and then all of a sudden we didn't get any more emails, and I had to call some different places to find out what was going on, and they basically said, I mean, it's good. We've got enough volunteers. We really just we're taking volunteers and people that actually have, friends, relatives, or somebody that's handicapped. Well, and I didn't. I just found it rewarding, but it was really negative. I felt, kind of like, somebody broke up with me or something. It's like, well, what I do? I've been volunteering for 25 years, and now all of a sudden I'm not good enough. I can't, just because I don't have a relative or a friend or something. It really, because I never had that problem in Texas. I guess, well, there must be more nice people up here or something. We have more people than they need, but it was just kind of an odd experience.
Yeah, that's, did you feel like they gave you an option? Like, well, here's some other things, things have changed. We maybe can't, there's no longer a good opportunity in this particular thing, but we'd like to keep you on board. No, it was just like, thanks. And
I made several calls. I mean, it took a while to get somebody even, to get in touch with somebody to find out, because I really did want to keep doing it. And I had to, make 4 or 5 phone calls, before I could actually get to somebody that could tell me why we weren't getting the emails and what was going on.
Yeah, that's really unfortunate. I mean, all relationships can come to an end, right? Including an organization's relationship with a volunteer and a volunteer's with an organization. But you want it to be mutual, right? So if something has changed in the organization or the volunteer opportunities, you want to sit down with that person and say, look, these things have changed. Maybe it's not possible for you to volunteer in the way that you used to. Here are some options. And sometimes those options are not acceptable to the volunteer, right? Understandably. But you have to, then you've demonstrated that you've tried your best to, keep them in the family, to keep the relationship going. And the other thing is that's really short-sighted. So now they've completely cast all of their non-disabled allies out. So now the only people involved in the organizations have direct contact with. I mean, that's really short-sighted. So that's too bad. And again, on behalf of, I apologize. Okay, so don't want to get too dragged down with the negatives here, but those are really good examples, and those are actually very common situations that people describe. Okay, so let's talk. What I want you to do is I want you to remember what you had in mind, what the other people shared. Basically, I want you to remember those experiences, remember those emotions as we talk about creating a project and experience for other people, for other volunteers. Okay, we're going to start talking about best practices. So I'm sure each of you, when you have volunteered, have, based on your experience, either said to yourself, boy, they really did this well. I really saw them do this well. And then the negative experience is, boy, if it were me, I would have done this. Or I don't understand why they didn't do this. Okay? So the 3 of us that developed this presentation basically said, we feel like what really the important aspects of really volunteer management in general, but then also too in terms of how it carries over to volunteer project development, are 3 aspects. The first is kind of more the heart, right? So what comes from here is connecting people, connecting to their motivations and their passions. Okay, tapping into their motivations and passions. That's what drives people. That's what's going to get them excited. That's what's going to get them to come back, to fly across water 3 times. That's what's going to get people to stay, get involved and stay committed. Managing expectations. Okay, we all know that we come to different experiences at different expectations. So it's important to make sure that you have a meeting of the minds. Okay, what the person is hoping to get out of the experience and what you can provide them. Okay, sometimes there's a mismatch, and that's okay usually as long as the people involved, the volunteers involved, have had some communication around that, and they can make some choices. I don't wish to participate because of that, or I need to change my expectations and know that I'll get this out of it perhaps, but perhaps maybe not that. Okay, and creating a positive experience. So we've gone from hearts to the head, managing expectations, positive experience. A lot of this comes down into the logistics. The planning logistics, the day of logistics. These are things like, for example, planning for a meal, having enough water, keeping people hydrated, all those detailed things that you have to do. Okay, so by table, what we're going to do is we're going to spend just 2 or 3 minutes. What I want you to do is I want you to brainstorm what you think best practices are that help tap into motivation and passion. I want you to think, what are some best practices that help manage expectations? And what are some best practices that help create a positive volunteer experience? And so what we'll do is we'll go by tables. We'll have this one do motivation and passion. You guys can do managing expectations. You can do creating a positive experience. And then since you're 3, why don't you divide up and each join one of these tables? Okay? So just right off the top of your head, based on your experiences of what works and what doesn't work, what do you think are some best practices?